The story of the Bell Witch took place from 1817 to 1820 in a small town near Nashville called Red River, Tennessee, which is now known as Adams, Tennessee. What happened here is so terrifying that some folks, even today, refuse to talk about it. This is the story of one of the most well-known hauntings in American history. This is the story of the Bell Witch. To many, the story of the Bell Witch is history and folklore. The legend is taught in many elementary history classes in Tennessee. To others, it's a terrifying tale of a sinister poltergeist. One of the most knowledgeable people in the country on the Bell Witch is author-historian Tim Henson. Henson, who worked for the state for 26 years, now operates the Bell Museum in Adams, Tennessee. He's also written many books on the subject.
I find John Bell still in North Carolina in late October of 1804. He sells 360 acres of land on the Tar River.
He had owned a farm there, and he had slaves there.
John Bell married Lucy Williams. She married John Bell. Ingram's book says 1782 at the age of 12. I would prefer to think that it's possibly later, since the first child was born in 1790, that being Jesse.
There was a man by the name of M.V. Ingram that wrote the authenticated history of the Bell Witch. It was printed in 1894, but he actually started printing the book way beyond that. It is believed that Ingram wrote this book by talking to families and stuff.
John Bell bought land in the 1780s. I found some records of land purchases and land sales. He had trained to be a cooper, which is a barrel maker, a hogshead maker. And I must assume that that's probably what he was doing along with his farming and probably building up a little wealth. He's an older man. Lucy is obviously a young woman, anywhere from 12 to 18 years old when they got married. It's a good guess in there because census records are not clear in those days. Frederick, Benjamin, in my opinion, Bats, his brother, and Jeremiah and John Bell, possibly 2 or 3 other families came to Robeson County. There's one indication from North Carolina there were at least 11 families in the wagon train that left North Carolina in late 1804, early 1805 to move to Tennessee.
As the Bells came across the mountains of North Carolina, they experienced a phenomenon known locally as the Brown Mountain Lights. And actually they seen the balls of light flying up from the ground up into the sky, you know. And it kind of set the theme for what they were to experience later on in years. In 1810, there was a great comet appeared in the sky, and everybody took it as an omen, something bad was going to happen. It stayed in the sky nightly until December of 1811, when the largest earthquake to ever hit the continental United States hit. It actually was so strong it rang church bells in Boston, Massachusetts. It was felt all across the United States. It was called the New Madrid earthquake, centered in New Madrid, Missouri. It actually made the Mississippi River flow backwards and form Reelfoot Lake up in northwestern Tennessee. If that wasn't enough, in 1815, a large volcano erupted in Indonesia, and it spewed several million metric tons of ash into the air, which resulted in a reduction of the sun in the stratosphere, and it actually caused the year 1816 to be the year without a summer. The cattle starved, all the crops died. Corn got up to $10 a bushel, which was like 3 years' wages in 1816.
The Bells arrived here. They set up farming. The area was called Red River. And in about the 1830s, they got a post office, which lasted until 1866. Prior to that, the Bells, the Johnstons, the Guns, the Forts would have had to go into Port Royal or to Keysburg, Kentucky to get their mail. And they would have forded the river just below us here, where Sturgeon Creek empties into Red River. Between 1808, 1809, and the time of the legend, most of the record that we have of John Bell is found in the minutes of the Red River Baptist Church of Christ. In 1816, he purchased a slave girl from Benjamin Bats, who also, I believe, as I said earlier, came with the Bells in 1804, 1805 for $100. The minutes say that they called John Bell before the church at that point to find out what the problem was between him and Benjamin Betts. And John Bell states that he has purchased this slave and had a bill of sale for her, but he didn't take possession. Evidently she was a young girl and he left her with her mother for a while. When he went back to get her, Benjamin has changed his mind. He's decided he doesn't want to sell her or that she's worth more. Evidently an argument ensued and the neighbors became aware of it. And John Bell told Benjamin that I'll sell her back to you for $150. But he says in the minutes that he ultimately did sell her back to Benjamin for $120, tore up the bill of sale, and believed at that point that the deal was done. Benjamin goes to Springfield and files a lawsuit against John Bell. And the result was, 2 years later, John Bell was excommunicated from the Red River Baptist Church. I'm going to be one of the few people that will say this. From my research, Kate Betts was the daughter of one John Williams Jr., Lucy Bell's older brother.
Some say that Kate Betts was the reason behind the haunting. Betts was a spiteful old woman who believed that she had been cheated in a land purchase by John Bell. She told Bell that she would get even with him and that his family would pay for what he did to her.
Kate Betts was a unique lady. She was very much in charge. Back in that day, women didn't do any of the business that men did. They didn't run farming operations or anything like that, and she did. She was very much involved in the affairs because her husband died, and she took over where he left off.
She was eccentric, and the ladies didn't like her because she was very outspoken. And one illustration is supposedly happened at the Red River Church when they were having a revival. She always came late. She always traveled with 3 slaves, and they called it Kate Betts' troop. She would saddle her side saddle. No self-respecting woman in those days would straddle a horse, but never get on the horse. And they would walk wherever they were going, always arriving late.
She would come in with a loud entrance and make a scene everywhere she went.
Kate arrived late one day to church. There was a man by the name of Edwards down on his all fours trying to find salvation, according to Ingram. Kate, instead of going to her pew, goes down front, sits on the back of Mr. Edwards, flattens him on the floor. He begins to holler, "Oh Lord, I'm sinking," believing he's having a religious experience because her hoop skirt has darkened out his eyesight. She sits there. The preacher begs her, Suggs Fort begs her to get off of him. "You're smothering him." She said, "That's fine. He's getting closer to the Lord. Let him suffocate."
Some believe that Betts practiced witchcraft and conjured up a spirit to kill John Bell. Ironically enough, the spirit called herself Kate throughout the haunting. According to legend, the first manifestation of the haunting occurred in 1817 when John Bell encountered a strange animal in the cornfield on his property. The animal, described as having had the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit, vanished when Bell shot at it. Afterwards, a series of strange beating and gnawing noises manifested around, and eventually could be heard inside the Bell cabin.
There were all kinds of noises like chains rolling down the stairs and scrapings and funny sounds, and it got to be an every night thing, and it was really a torment.
They first thought that some of the neighbors were playing pranks on them, so as they got louder and louder, they were keeping the bells up at night. They couldn't sleep.
They began to see the strange birds and the animals. Dean began to talk about seeing animals in the field that were big as human beings and could talk, and that was the slave of John Bell Sr. And he told a lot of stories. He talked about, a donkey talking to him. He talked about big birds too, as did the Bell family in general. But Dean told a lot of the stories in the early days. They had a still, and I think some of those stories could have been enhanced a little bit when they'd passed the jug around a little bit, and Dean probably participated in that. Betsy was born in Robeson County, the first child of the Bells to be born here, the one that supposedly the spirit, the witch, the poltergeist, whatever you want to call it, tormented the most.
One night she woke up with strange noises in her bedroom, and she started to get up, but her hair was tied in knots around one of the bedposts.
She would wake up screaming. They'd go to her room and get a light lit, a candle, whatever they had in those days, a lamp, and her hair would be tied in knots. The covers would be on the floor, and of course she would declare that every time she'd pull the covers up, it would snatch them away from her. It did so many things according to what Ingram wrote in 1894. I guess some of the obvious things were the whelks on Betsy's face, handprints where it would slap. They would hear the noise, see nothing but see an imprint of a hand. And then the boys, that's Joel and Richard in particular, they're younger, they began to show whelks on their legs and began to scream and holler and supposedly come down the stairs at night. They would hear strange noises like a rat gnawing on the bedpost, and they'd get up, hold the candle. Of course, they could find no evidence of anything chewing on anything. It was first, Richard declared it was like rocks being thrown against the outside of the house. And of course, they would try to attribute that to something, limbs, trees, somebody. But when it began to move inside, and the noises were on the inside of the house, is when they began to be very concerned, according to legend. But it loved Lucy, and when Lucy became sick one year, which I believe was in the fall of 1820, it is credited with helping bring her through. She had pleurisy. Dr. Hobson at Port Royal was called. And there was some question as to whether or not she would live, but the spirit would sing her religious songs and coax her along and dropped hazelnuts on her bed for her to eat, and grapes from the woods from mysteriously would just appear out of the ceiling. And then when she was better, it credited Dr. Hobson with saving her life. All the time this is going on, John Bell's health is deteriorating, and it's tormenting him. It's singing gospel songs to Lucy and cussing John. And this is the way it supposedly acted all the way through this process, almost 4 years.
Of course, John swore all of his kids to secrecy. Don't tell anybody about this. This is something we can handle in the family. Nobody needs to know about it.
The family was terrified, but kept the problem to themselves for over a year.
And then the word got out that these strange things were happening, and so people, especially the Johnston family, being so close, they tried to help in any way that they could.
When things became intolerable, John confided in a neighbor, James Johnston. He invited Mr. and Mrs. Johnston to spend the night.
Now, James Johnston, according to Ingram, believes that through prayer and Bible reading, maybe they can get rid of whatever this is. They don't know at the time. And he declares that he will come to John Bell's house with his wife, and they will sit with them and read the Bible and pray, and maybe they'll get rid of this.
After several nights of witnessing these strange things, Mr. Johnston suggested that more people should be told, and a committee was formed and an investigation started.
When you hear the term witch, you actually get this mental image in your mind of this old crone wearing a black cloak, black pointed hat, riding a broomstick, That's more or less how our mind, we've been ingrained to think what a witch is. So anyway, the Bell Witch was nothing of that sort. Actually, the Bell Witch was not a witch. She was not a ghost. She was not a spirit. The only thing I can think of actually that would best describe what they experienced a witch, would be a poltergeist haunting.
I do not refer to it as the witch, because I refer to it as the spirit, because in some of the earlier writings it mentions it as the spirit of the Bell family. Most of that stuff was handed down, not by written. It was handed down by stories, just like what the Indians would have done. That's basically what it was done. It was handed down through legend, and that's why most of it, the original stuff, is legend.
The Bell Witch was real. By the end of 1817, it had been witnessed by at least one outsider. The Bell Witch became a sensation, and even strangers traveled great distances to visit the Bells, hoping to see evidence of their spirit or demon. Even Andrew Jackson, soldier and future president, claimed to have met the Bell Witch.
He and a wagon load of his troops decided to come up from, well, we'd say Nashville today, but really it was the Hermitage area, from the Hermitage, and brought camping gear. They were going to come and stay a while to see what was going on. They had heard about the goings-on at the Bell house. As he nears the Bell property, legend says that his wagon seized up. One account says that one of the men on there made a comment about having a silver bullet and was going to do the witch in, or he was going to take care of her, whatever. Another account just says that they froze up. Anyway, they're out trying to move the wagon. They're pushing the wheels. They're whipping the horses. Nothing is working. And at some point, I don't know if Jackson apologized, whatever happened, they hear the voice out of the bushes that says, "You can go ahead now, General." and visit the Bells, and the wagon becomes free. On down the road they go.
Right here's the road they say he came down. It was the only road that was here.
Right.
This road eventually went on to the Bell Farm.
Huh. Which used to be
That direction, north, and
Okay.
north, actually a little northwest.
We know, or we believe, they stayed at least one night camping out at the Bell house. Jackson is reported to have said, though we cannot find this in his papers at the Hermitage, that he'd rather fight the whole of the British Army than to face or spend one more night at the Bell house. So whatever happened that night evidently gave him the woolies.
As time passed, the spirit continued to torture the Bell family. John Bell was becoming very sick, and on the night of December 20th, 1820, he died.
He got so sick he went to bed and lay down one day and actually never got up. They found him Drew come in one morning to check on him and found he was more or less unconscious, had a strange odor on his breath. And they checked his medicine and found a strange smoky vial sitting in his medicine cabinet, and nobody knew where it come from. Had never been seen before. So they had the same odor on John's breath as what the smoky vial smelled like. So they took a broom straw and put it in a bottle and then run it through a cat's mouth. Well, the cat turned about 3 flips in the air and just fell over dead.
So now they know that John Bell's been poisoned, but the question is, who poisoned old John Bell? And they began to question each other. Was it Betsy? Was it John Jr.? Did Lucy do this? Did one of the neighbors? And then they hear the voice that they've heard so often in the house, which they call the spirit. And it said, I fixed his medicine last night, gave him a big dose of it, and he'll never get up out of that bed again.
For the first time in American history, a death is blamed on a spirit.
Legend says he was brought out here on the hill, back over here to my left, and to be buried. And James Johnston was there, of course, the neighbors were there, the bukus of neighbors were there. Lucy had asked Suggs Fort, the Baptist preacher, to preach the funeral, as well as James Gunn and Thomas, his brother, the two Methodist preachers in the community. One account says that they couldn't be heard for the noise of the laughing, cursing, and singing in the trees. Another account says as soon as they finished preaching, they began to hear the screeches and the screams. And she sang a song, "Oh, Roll Me Down Some Brandy O," which was a term for, they put whiskey and brandy in barrels in those days, and made fun. And of course, when finally they got him covered up and they left the cemetery, that's when it became quiet at the Bell house, supposedly, for some period of time, until at least 1821, when Betsy became engaged.
After the funeral, her intensity, she just more or less just diminished every day until finally she was just a faint voice. She appeared to John Jr. and told him that she would be gone for a period of 7 years, in which she would appear, which she'd come back.
Ingram wrote that things settled down, Betsy got better, and they thought things were over with, until Joshua Gardner asked Betsy to marry him. And that would have been sometime in April, early part of 1821, at which time Richard wrote in his diary, it was like the voice of thunder. All this mess is back again. Now it's talking again. Betsy sees the little girl hanging from the tree again, the apparition, and it's telling her, please, Betsy, please don't marry Joshua Gardner. Please, Betsy, please don't have Joshua Gardner. And of course she becomes very nervous again, and legend says that she refused to marry him at that point, either give him back his ring or told him she couldn't marry him. And he moved away. That's what the book says. Betsy was a student of Richard Powell, as was her younger brothers, Joel and Richard. And if you believe his statement, periodically he would visit the Bells and tell Lucy and John how beautiful their daughter was, how intelligent she was, and there seems to be some affection there, even though we know officially he was married to Esther Scott Powell. Their marriage was over the period of time, which included the legend of the Bell Witch, which means as he was teaching Betsy and Richard and Joel and all the rest of the Bell children, he was married to Esther Scott. She died in 1821, which was the year that Joshua and Betsy supposedly broke up. The witch supposedly broke up their little escapade, and Joshua moves to West Tennessee. And in 1824, I believe it was March 21st, it was in March, that he marries Betsy Bell. She becomes Betsy Bell Powell. Out of the 8 children born to Richard and Betsy Bell Powell, 4 of them died before the age of 12. 3 of them died between 1839 and 1840, and they were ranging in age from 4 or 5 years old all the way up. One child was almost 12 when it died. I don't know if some disease came through, I'm not sure what happened, but the Bells had a lot of tragedy in their life. And sometime between 1873 and 1875, she moved to Mississippi, where 2 daughters were living at that time. She dies in 1888. Betsy had a tough life, but even near the end, when someone asked her, she said she considered it basically happy, even though she had lost all of her children but 2 and her husband at a fairly young age. Betsy is buried in Water Valley, Mississippi.
Even today, strange things have happened to people in Adams. Many claim that it's the Bell Witch.
I'm the owner of Austin and Bell Funeral Home. I'm 5th generation here. We started in 1842 here in Springfield. Well, actually in Turnersville. Well, it wasn't talked about a lot when I was young. My grandmother was sort of ashamed of it. I guess that was the feel of the family. Back in that point in time, no one talked about the witch because they were sort of embarrassed. It was a sort of a demeaning thing to be associated with the witch. And so I didn't learn a lot about it till later in life. And the Blair Witch Project came out, and this explosion of interest in the Bell Witch came about, and then everybody started talking about it, and it's become sort of a fun thing to do now.
We lived there probably off and on maybe somewhere around 20 years. And there was some slave graves out front. And a lot of people, about the Bell Witch. And we heard a lot of things in that old house over the 20 years we were there. And not so much as seeing a lot of things, but hearing a lot of things.
There are all kinds of stories all over everywhere, but the only ones that I've ever told are what the 2 women told me. And this is the way kind of that they started. The first thing when they said they'd tell me the story was, they asked me, they said, do you believe in the Bible? And I said, well, sure, yes. And they said, well, do you believe that there were demons? And I said, well, the Bible says there were, yes. And she said, and then they said, well, this is a story of demons who haunted the Bells. And that was a real, maybe a controversial way to tell the story.
Of course, I grew up here in Springfield, and I live in my grandmother's house now. And that house, for whatever reason, became a site of having odd occurrences happening. I think the first thing I remember happening was my grandmother, when she lived there. We lived 3 doors up, and she would take a nap in the afternoon, and she called up one afternoon. I happened to be 7 years old at that point in time, and she was really scared, and she asked Dad to come down. So I went down with him, and we went to the house, and we had to get her to unlock the door. She had the door locked, and so we went in, and she was just terrified, and so she said, search the house. So we looked the whole house over, and we didn't know what we were looking for. We checked the windows and under the beds and the closets, and nothing was in the house. And then we came back down, and Grandmother was in the kitchen still scared, and she goes, now look. And we looked, and on the floor were all her china. It was all scattered across the kitchen floor. And she proceeded to tell us that she was upstairs taking a nap, and she heard this crash that woke her, and she came downstairs and saw all her dishes on the floor. And where they came from was a butler's pantry. It was a pantry in between the dining room and the kitchen, and it was in a china cabinet that was built into the wall with locking doors. And when we looked at the china cabinet, all the doors were open, and every piece of china was out of the cabinet onto the floor.
Like the Bell Witch Cave, it's always told everybody that goes in the cave not to take any artifacts home with you, because for the bad things that happened to people that did, there's been several instances where somebody would pick up a rock, put it in their pocket, go home with it. Bad things happened to them.
Charles Bailey Bell, who wrote the Black Bell Witch book, which is still sold at the museum and in several places, called The Bell Witch of Tennessee, donated a part of John Bell Jr.'s land to the city, which was called Adams Station at that time, to build a high school, or the city of Adams, town of Adams. And in 1912, a high school was built on the property of John Bell Jr.'s. In 1916, they added the 12th grade. Prior to that, you could go from the 1st to the 10th grade. It remained a school of 12 grades until 1949, and then it became just an elementary school and closed in 1975. There have been antique malls and different activities in the building since that time. The city now owns the building, and stories have begun to accumulate of seeing a little girl in a green dress was the first story that I was told. Antique people that owned it 10 years ago keep telling me that they keep seeing a little girl who would come around the corner, they'd see her, then she would dissipate. Long blonde hair, a green dress. And the folks that have it today tell me they feel a presence, they've seen a haunting, but I didn't give it a lot of credence until about 2 years ago when a man came in the museum one day. I worked for the city for 26 years, and one day I look out my window of my office and I see a black Camaro with Montgomery County license. I could see it well, but I couldn't understand why the man didn't get out. So I went out on the porch to see if everything was all right. He jumps out of the car. He says, "Where's the cave? Can I get in the Bell Witch Cave?" And I said, "Buddy, you're at the wrong place. You're at the water department." He said, "You don't understand. I've got to get in the cave." And I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He said, "Last Friday night," which would have been 4, 5, 6 days before, "I came over here and took a tour of the cave, and they warned me not to take anything from the cave. And I took a rock." And he said, "When I got home Saturday morning, my wife left me. Went to work Monday, and I lost my job. And they notified me the day before yesterday they were kicking me out of my apartment." He said, "I got to get this rock back in that cave." I said, "Well, if you just go up the hill and go to the entrance, I'm sure the owner will come out, and he will meet you." And sure enough, he did.
We could hear different things walking in the house, cabinet doors shutting, voices, and two of my sons lived, their bedroom was up over ours, and a lot of things happened to them boys up there. They would, my oldest son, it tried to talk to him, because it more than once it called his name out talking to him. And he was scared of it.
I remember in the 70s they did a special on the three famous ghost stories of Tennessee, and the Bell Witch was the third one of this mini-series, and we watched the first two, and then the Bell Witch was coming on, and they started with Andrew Jackson's carriage coming on the property, and as soon as the picture came on, or the show started, the picture went out. The sound was on, but the picture was gone. And when the commercials would come on, we'd see the commercial, and then when it would go back to the show, the picture would go out. Well, we were all upset about it because we had all gathered in the room to watch it. And so Dad called next door to Mr. Moore's house and told him to turn his TV on, and he did, and he had a picture. He said, "Well, you mind if I come over?" He said, "No, come on over." So he went over next door, and as soon as he got in the house, his picture went out. And so we never saw the story. I don't know what was about the story that we weren't supposed to see, but that was really odd. And as soon as the program was over, our TV was working properly again.
My youngest son, after my two oldest boys moved up, my youngest son, he lived up there. And I guess it liked him, because it never bothered him. But one of the oddest occurrences I ever had upstairs was in his room was I went up there one evening. I was looking for something that he had borrowed and left it up there in his room. He wasn't at home. So I looked and couldn't find it, and I started to go back down the steps, put my hand on the handrail, and I've always said, "What are you looking for?" And of course that made cold chills all up and down, and I looked around, wasn't a soul in the room. My wife, she was downstairs in the kitchen. And the only thing I could say, I can't find what I'm looking for, so I left in a hurry.
I'd heard these tales about the Bell Witch all my life, things like that. I'd read the books and everything on it, and I kind of thought, well, all these people have got all these different tales they're telling and all, so I decided to combine a lot of them. Of course, the only information we have on the book is what actually Richard Williams Bell actually wrote down, which was like 40 years after the fact. That's the only documented information we have. So I had to take a lot of that, and the way it was written is kind of hard to understand. So I'll put it in today's language, a lot of that stuff. I added a lot of things myself. But while I was writing this book, I had weird things. I experienced weird things. I'd be sitting there at my computer and just be totally engrossed in writing. And all of a sudden to see somebody walk by the door of the room. Of course I'd look, see who was there, and there'd be nobody there.
One thing is, this is the oldest continuous ghost story in America that still lives today. A few years ago, we were lucky enough to have a guy that was a Juilliard graduate that went to school here in Adams. His name was David Alford. Wrote a play called The Spirit. And that is put on every year in October in Adams. It's about the only one that still has members of the actual family of the Bells that is included in that. I think that is, that was an important part. And then there's also been several movies that was printed. One of them is called The Bell Witch. But if you get on the internet, possibly the witch legend has more sites than about anything that you can imagine. Over the years, it's been interestingly enough that there was a comic book one time was written about the witch. There is one called Fate, which was an old. It started in 1948. They wrote one in 48, which was the second copy of that particular book. It was on UFOs. There was a book called by Mitchum that was printed that the Bell Witch was hung between two worlds, which the book never did do anything, but the Bell Witch was hung between two worlds. And there was three magicians that was going to go and talk to the Bell Witch, and one of them was Harry Houdini. And that book was written in 1934. A guy from Nashville area wrote the very first musical on the Bell Witch that actually was produced in New York. It was in Carnegie Hall. But it was not first produced there. Actually, it was first produced in 1939 in Nashville. And there was a lady by the name of Dinah Shore who actually played the first Betsy Bell that we know of. That is in newspapers, and it has been written that she actually did portray the part of Betsy Bell in 1939. That was the year she graduated from Vanderbilt University. The movie that came out, The American Haunting, it went all over the world. It brought the legend back here, and I really think that we've had people to come back here to see what Adams is. The first thing that a lot of times they mention, they get to Adams is this it? Because Adams is not a big place. Adams cares about the legend, but it cares about the legend in its own way. It doesn't care whether the world cares about it. It doesn't care whether the world comes here to see it. This is kind of still a private thing, I think, among the people here. A lot of the stories are still handed down through here. We have the cave here, and as you can see behind us, we have Bellwood, which is a cemetery that belongs to the Bell Trust. John Jr.'s land belongs to, John Sr.'s land is in the Bell Trust, but it is off limits to people. John Jr.'s is also off limits to people. And most of the land here was not farmed the exact same way, but this land's been farmed for 200 years. There's still farmers here. These pieces of land are still being farmed today. Tobacco's still being raised here. The only thing that's not raised here at their time period was cotton. But everything else is still here. We still raise wheat, we raise soybeans, we raise corn, we raise tobacco. That's something that's been handed down into this just as much as the legend. The interesting thing about Robertson County is the people here are still just as free-spirited as they were in that time period. Most of them in the Adams area are still farmers. A lot of them are. There's not any industry that I know of or any big industry in Adams, Tennessee. The people up here, they care about the legend going around the world, but to them it's still just kind of a local thing. The legend is here. What I wanted to do is I always said that I would collect and bring back every bit of the information that has been written about it. I don't necessarily believe half the crap that's in these books because most of it's crap. I hate to say it that way, but it is. Basically, they reprint the same stuff over and over and over. About 90% of it comes from Ingram's book. They think that when they found the Ingram book, that they found something new, but Ingram's been here since 1894. Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring back the legend part, and I also wanted to bring back all the books that I could find and all the writings that I could find on the subject, because one day maybe I might make a library of this. But I just thought it would be an interesting thing to find out how many writings that there are.
All these things, we're happy. Adams is tickled to death to have a museum. We're happy and proud of our heritage, our our past, and the Bell Witch legend is just a part of our history in the museum at Adams, Tennessee.
When I went away to college, I had absolutely nothing happen to me, and the ones that I know that have been away have not had any stories that have occurred. Most of the stories happen here in Robertson County and the surrounding area around here. In this area, it's affected many people outside the Bell family. It's affected a lot. There's stories that come from all over the community of things that have happened, of babies getting spanked that were crying too loud, and just odd things that have happened in the Adams area. But mainly the Adams area is the hot spot, so to speak. I don't know if it's because of the cave and the proximity to the house and the story, but most of the stories happen in the county, and they happen to men, women, children, everybody.
I've always been, during the process of this documentary, just kind of on the fence about, whether the whole Bell Witch hauntings really happen and stuff like that. I've heard about past Bell Witch productions, like films that have been made about it and so forth, and that they've had problems and, on-set accidents and stuff like that, just kind of weird things. And I was, kind of wondering and expecting something similar to happen to us, maybe, just to validate for me personally that, this is something that's really going on. Nothing happened the whole duration of shooting, and, I told Zach, the producer, I was just basically like, well, maybe after, all these years, the Bell Witch actually wants publicity now. I don't know. I mean, she seems to be letting us get by just fine. Until, of course, I got to the whole editing process, and then that was a different story. When we got back to Nashville, where I was editing, most of the editing just went pretty smoothly. I mean, everything was fine. There wasn't any strange things going on until there was a week where I was pretty much almost done with the cut, almost done, ready to have it finished. I was going to burn it on the DVD, and the hard drive I was using to basically store the entire documentary on kept shutting down. It would shut off when I would try to move the documentary to DVD for viewing. So Zach, the producer, could see it, and we could speak on it and finalize it, and I could not get it burned, and it took me literally the entire day just trying over and over and over again to burn this documentary to DVD, and the hard drive kept shutting down. It would just go to sleep or something. I'm not sure what it was that it was doing. So I got frustrated and mad, and I just gave up for the day, and I was going to come back to it the next day. So in the meantime, while all this is happening, I'm having a lot of trouble sleeping. I mean, I have probably the worst insomnia I've ever had during this week. I mean, for no reason. I mean, I'm not doing anything different in my schedule that would cause such a thing. Days go by and I'm still attempting to burn this DVD, and it just will not burn, and I don't understand why. And I'm frustrated and I'm tired, and I'm just thinking to myself, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, the Bell Witch has a hand in this. I mean, she's been pretty quiet. She's kind of left us alone through the whole process of this documentary, but now she's all of a sudden feeling like picking on us while we're at the home stretch of finishing the documentary. Well, and to make matters worse, I got really sick while I was editing, almost closing in on the end of it, which is unusual because I'm one of those people that never gets sick. I get sick probably once every 6 or 7 years, and all of a sudden I got really sick, and I had a bad fever, and I couldn't move, and it was terrible. And that was another red flag that was making me think, maybe the Bell Witch has a hand in this. I don't know, but yeah, that was a little bit alarming to me. I mean, it may just be nothing more than a technology failure of some freaky kind, but it's kind of fun, since we're actually working on a documentary about the Bell Witch, that our production could be in fact haunted by the Bell Witch, and that's very interesting.
The story of the Bell Witch remains one of America's most frightening ghost stories. What really happened in these woods? Was it a spirit, a poltergeist, or the work of a demon? Whatever the case, this story will never be forgotten. and will be talked about for generations.
Really, it never was solved. And even to this day, we don't know what went on, what didn't go on, what was real and what was not real.
Legend states that if you stand alone in a dark room, look into the mirror and say, "I hate the Bell Witch," 3 times, she will appear in the reflection of the mirror.